What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. Jammin' John's not available tonight. He's got a long shift at work, so I decided to do this one solo. And, well, this is a band that I'm familiar with, and he's really not, which I know that's a bit of a theme here, and I introduced him to all sorts of stuff, but this is one that I definitely wanted to go over just because I hadn't listened to him in a while. Also, a disclaimer, everything on here is in Icelandic, and much like any other language outside of English, I don't speak Icelandic, and I'm probably going to butcher a lot of pronunciations here. Par for the course, I know, but I figured I'd get that out there. Anyway, I'm going to go over the latest offering from Sólstafir, which that album title is, forgive me, Hin helga. Might have got that one right. Either way, this is another album that comes out on the 8th of November on Century Media Records. This band formed in 1995 in Iceland. This is their 8th album overall. I got introduced to this band with their album Svartir Sandar. Might have got that right too. I'd heard of them, and a lot of people talk about them as like an interesting post-black metal band. In fact, that's probably the first time I ever heard the term post-black metal. So I decided to check them out, and I thought their sound was pretty cool, though that is the only album I own, and I've kind of just dropped off of this band because, I don't know, I just kind of forgot about them. Now, this band's sound has had an interesting trajectory. They started off way more black metal, Viking-themed black metal, I believe, and then have slowly kind of morphed into post-black metal, post-rock. At points, I really wouldn't call this necessarily metal, but there are definitely some metal elements that still are kind of a part of the band's sound overall. And, it's one of those bands that achieves a certain kind of heaviness, but maybe just not in a traditional metal sense. A lot of this I feel is more akin to post-rock, especially the tone, the production. It's very lush and very ambient, and the guitars definitely don't have a very traditional metal sound. They're very fuzzy, very atmospheric, and when it comes down to the riff work on here, you get a lot of different things on here. The opening track in here, Hun Adar, maybe. It's a nice, up-tempo, kind of anthemic but dark song. You have these very ambient riffs, these, heavy tremolos, but they're, I don't know, more atmospheric. You don't get a dark, foreboding sense. It's more melancholic and desperate, especially when the vocals come in, which are these agonized bellows and croons and, occasionally some growls. But for the most part, it's just very emotionally driven. Musically, it reminded me more of bands like Killing Joke, I would say Joy Division a bit. It has a rocker-like energy because, again, it has this up-tempo rhythm, but when you kind of break it down and get down to the riffs and the melodies and the ambience, it just feels very melancholic and forlorn, I guess. There are only a few moments on here where it really feels dark and heavy in a more metallic sense. The rest of the time, it's kind of all over the place, but again, you get a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily in the whole metal wheelhouse. There's a lot of elements of bands like This Will Destroy You or Caspian, but all this is blended together really well to the point where I feel a lot of these songs kind of stand on their own. There's not a lot of tracks in here that really run into one another. There's a lot of space between the more brooding, dark moments and the more up-tempo rockers. And there's some surprising shifts in the songs. Vor Oss, maybe that's how you say that, was one of my favorites on here. You get this nice kind of brooding ambience to begin with. It really sets up the song's atmosphere really well. And as it keeps going, it gets a little bit more intense. There's some fun off-time drumming effect. The song in particular has some of my favorite drumming on here. There's some call and response vocals that I really liked. Again, I have no idea what this guy's saying. He could be reading off his grocery list for all I know, but I mean, the thing that is communicated on here is emotion, and this one definitely feels a little bit more urgent, a little bit more, I don't know, desperate. It doesn't feel outright aggressive, but there's an energy to it that kind of propels the song. And then kind of halfway through, it really turns into this fun, riffy rocker. In fact, some of my favorite riffs on this album. And riffs are maybe a little bit scarce on here, so it was kind of nice to have just a good, flat-out rockin' riff. Something maybe kind of comparable to Kvelertak, though it doesn't have that sort of punky, sort of raucous energy to it. It just kind of sounds a straight-up good rock riff with, a little bit more aggression to it. Think International Noise Conspiracy or something like that. Man, I haven't thought about that band in forever. The same thing with the song Fregatten, which I might have said that right, probably not. It starts off with pianos, and I believe there's some strings in there. It sounded like a cello and some ambient guitar sort of humming in the background, and you get these more crooned vocals. They're a little bit more just kind of, again, like forlorn and desperate sounding. There's a steady sort of swell and energy, and then it builds into what I would say is like almost kind of like a Pink Floyd style rocker. Like you get these big emotional swells and kind of bluesy riffs in there too. Like again, the guitar work's kind of hard to peg, and a lot of it kind of comes down to the guitar tone being, again, like very wispy sounding. Like it's almost like a hum of static in the background, where occasionally you can like kind of make out like a chord change. Thankfully, the lead tone in here is very clear because the lead on that song comes in absolutely beautifully. It's very, feel-based, a lot of like David Gilmour-ish sorts of tones in there. And there's even some sax, and occasionally you get like female vocals on here, which back up the main vocalist with either like kind of like ghostly faint wails in the background, or just a flat out call and response thing, which shows up on Voras and kind of gives it like a little bit of like a bluesy swagger to it. Salumessa is kind of similar, where it is a more brooding, slow song, a good steady, slow build, more crooned vocals. Everything is kind of subdued and muted, but you can feel a building energy behind it. It's a very moody, dark song, and as the vocals build in energy, so does the music. I really dig that song. Same thing with the last song, which, forgive me, this one's going to be tough. Kumul? K-U-M-L. I don't even know how you're supposed to say that. But there's also more in parentheses here. Forspill, Salmar. And the last one, I'm not entirely sure, because there's a letter in their alphabet that most certainly does not appear in ours. And I'm not sure what noise it's supposed to make. So we'll just say the last track. Probably the most dark, kind of brooding, almost kind of doomy song on here. And it's not necessarily that heavy. It's more, I don't know, like dingy lounge music, but with like a kind of weird, just dark energy to it. There's a deep rumbling bass hum in the background, a kind of like lackadaisical drum line, but that kind of carries the song. You get some weird rhythmic chants and just like an atmospheric sort of like din in the background. But the whole thing combined feels like a Twin Peaks style creepy slow dance in the Black Lodge. Like it's just moody and dark. And when the vocal chants come back in with their very just kind of dark sounding refrain, again, I have no idea what they're saying, but it sounds spooky and it definitely sets the mood on here. But it builds to this like grand crescendo of just darkness and then kind of slowly dissipates off into the shadows. So baseline, mood, and atmosphere is kind of the big thing on here. Like all of this really feels more focused on, the atmosphere rather than, like kind of like traditional rock hooks. That isn't saying that they aren't on here, and there are some more metal moments, but for the most part, I feel like this is like the score to like a weird art house horror movie. Like it's not like a gorehound flick. It's just about, setting and atmosphere and like weird character developments and like what goes on off screen, the stuff you only hear but you don't see, that kind of makes your mind wander a little bit more and makes it more unsettling. But this does have like some heavier moments on here that definitely feel like callbacks to their black metal roots. The second track, which is the title track, I don't have to say it, that's awesome. Notably, probably the most metallic song on the album. There are blast beats, droning tremolos, there's even some good riffy breakdowns. The vocals definitely have more aggression to them. I don't know how much of the sound they've been playing in terms of like their more recent releases, like, all the ones that I've missed, but this definitely has like just a flat out like atmospheric sort of black metal feel to it, like Harakiri for the Sky or like Ghost Bath and bands like that. The same can be said for the 8th track, Newman. Oh man, that's one of those letters. I tried writing it. I know it's one of those because it doesn't look like any other letter that I've ever seen, other than the squiggly lines that I wrote down for the 9th track. We'll just say the 8th track because I don't know what noises these letters make. It's also more black metal related, though I would say like a little bit more bright. There's more ascending tremolos in it. And the drum work on these songs, I think, is really interesting because they're not necessarily like the most traditional blast. Like sometimes it's like a single kick sort of like marching blast. And it almost kind of comes across more as a gallop than like a straight up like blast beat. It kind of keeps it from sounding like just too straightforward black metal. I kind of like that little interesting hitch there. Now, as I said, I feel like this is very emotionally driven, and much like emotions, they can get the better of you and you can kind of, go off the rails a bit. And there are points in this album where I do feel like it kind of loses the script, maybe in some of the transitions. Like the song Gryla, I think that's how you say it. I mean, at least it has letters I recognize. That one definitely has like a more like, kind of like post-hardcore sort of vibe, like, like heavier strumming that's more atmospheric, kind of akin to like, Deftones circa White Pony, maybe like a little bit of Quicksand or Helmet in there too. Some really nice drum grooves, but then it takes like some interesting transitions after that. It all of a sudden kind of drops out into like jazzy lounge music and then into like an almost sort of proggy flourish. And the whole second half of the song feels like it spends a lot of time transitioning but not hanging on to that moment they transition into long enough, especially at the end. The end feels like you're getting ready for like a grand swell of just melodies and just like soaring crescendo material, and then it kind of just cuts off. I felt like there was like easily another 30 seconds or a minute's worth of music that could have been played to really cap off that song properly. Block Rocky also is kind of a odd one too, where it feels like just like heavy indie rock. Like it's just a very straightforward rocker with a big chorus refrain. It's got some, fun riffs, but at the same time, it just feels kind of ordinary. Like it's probably the most straightforward song on here with like a very straightforward kind of rock hook, but it doesn't necessarily go much of anywhere. Like it feels like it should be building to something more grand, which a lot of these songs are pretty good at. But outside of some like fun drum work, it kind of just stays there. Like it's just like, kind of a heavy indie rocker. And while I like the mood and the atmosphere in here, I have to say, like, the vocals with this band in general, at least from what I've heard, have just always been hit or miss. Like, I like the desperation and anguish and emotion in the guy's vocals, but sometimes he's just not hitting notes cleanly, and I feel like, the emotional outpouring kind of gets the better of him, where you're not hitting the melodies that would really make the song soar more. Honestly, to me, he sounds a lot better when he drops his register and is kind of doing that more like low croon like you hear on Salumessa. I probably said that wrong twice. And while I like all the atmosphere and like empty space that kind of gets filled out with like layers of sound and ambience, I kind of miss like a heavier guitar tone, at least at times. At least some of like the heavier, more rockin' tracks, I feel like the guitar tone could have, changed up a little bit and got like just a little bit less fuzzy. But outside of that, I thought this was pretty good. Really wouldn't call it necessarily a metal album, though it definitely does have like what I would say are some more metal tracks on it. But it's interesting, cold, dark, but kind of like damp listen. Like this isn't like, like icy cold, frosty landscapes. This is more like melting snow, like it's damp and slushy and overcast the entire time. So pretty much like Toledo, like in about a month or two. Or actually, given our weather, it could be like tomorrow, who knows. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed this. This was just a dark, haunting, immersive listen. At times, I kind of wanted a little bit more out of, some of the songs, like namely, maybe just like settling down on some of the vocals, because sometimes they just felt a little bit off. And granted, I know he's singing in his native tongue, and maybe the enunciation is just like a little bit different there, but at times it did take me out of the songs. But in terms of like the interesting songwriting, the fact that the songs don't run into one another, and this feels like, just a very like dark, just somber journey with lots of just lush soundscapes on it, I think it's a pretty solid album. I love the lush atmosphere in here. I think it sounds really solid. Again, some of the guitars, I feel like, at least in the heavier moments, could use like a little bit more heft. But for the most part, when it comes down to kind of everything else, that sort of like droning hum in the background, I don't know, it feels kind of like warm in a way. If you're a big fan of bands like This Will Destroy You, Caspian, I would even say like Killing Joke to a degree. And I mean, as far as like metal, like the more metal moments, it's definitely more along the lines of like atmospheric post-black metal. So Garia, maybe a little bit, again, like Ghost Bath, and maybe just like a little bit of Caveller Attack too. Either way, if any of that sounds good to you, check this out. This was a pretty solid listen. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also now have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and we will be doing some members-only streams here soon. We'll probably make a post about it in terms of what we should talk about in our inaugural, first members-only stream. We also have really dumb emojis. I'll probably throw some more dumb emojis on there because it was just fun. We also still have more booger trolls, so I don't know. Do you want a booger family? Because we can make you a booger family. We're dumb like that. But yeah, this is the new way to help support the channel if you'd like. There's a join button down below. And we also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with t-shirts and hats and such. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, the link is down below in the video description. And of course, thank you guys so much for every bit of support you guys give us. It is amazing doing this. Tons of content coming in the future. New releases are kind of winding down, well, somewhat. This month's still got a lot of big releases, but we're eventually going to get down to year-end lists, probably some retro reviews, some more talking points. So once the new releases slow down, we're kind of free to talk about, I don't know, a whole bunch of different things. So definitely stay tuned. So yeah, one more big thank you because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.